Gur mágad agus bailen box gglach leis nada, agus leis techt a hánig go. As I said, I don't know if the lack of participation of the whole opposition is a sign of agreement or whatever, but we take it as a sign of agreement. The Minister raised a number of valid issues. And on the other hand, I think we have to be cautious that the system will always tell you the problems, not the solutions. And my belief is that there are two different roles, one for public servants and one for politicians. The public services always to warn of be cautious, and the politician's role is to drive things forward. And one without the other doesn't work. Now, in this particular proposal, yes, there are on the face of it a lot of agencies, but some of the agencies have very, very specific roles. So it was mentioned that, for example, the director of the National Museum wouldn't have any expertise in art. That's why it's possible under this bill to consult with the National Gallery. And that's where your art expertise come from. When it comes to documentation, historic documentation, obviously the National Library are the place. So you're using the whole panoply of national institutions. But my feeling is that what actually would happen is some committee would be formed between all our national institutions who mainly come under one minister, the Minister of Arts, etc., and that is how that would be pulled together. The second thing I think we have to watch is the system is always concerned about innovative things, rocking the status quo, moving away from what the things they're familiar with. And I think we need to get a much greater sense of adventure, of being brave, but this is purposely framed in such a way that by starting very, by an absolute obligation to start with the earliest ones, you're at the least risk of litigation or people coming forward, and you'd learn as you go along, and you can always change laws. Resources. Resources is often an argument for not doing things. And it seems as this country has become more wealthy, and the resources here are mainly, this is the interesting thing here, for the wealth that would be achieved, for the museums you could fill, you'd need property, you wouldn't need to buy the artefacts, and you would need staff resources. But look what you could get. If somebody said to you, we'll give you the Louvre, are you willing to staff it and provide a building for it, but we'll give you all the paintings in it for free? Would you take it or not? I'd hope to think Ireland would. And I often think of how adverse we've got to spend money on culture, history, legacy, art. And I think of, for example, the fact that the Commission Biologists that was set up in 1933, that's the Folklore Commission. There was money put aside in the budget, I think it was in 1933, to set up the Folklore Commission. At a time, Ireland was very poor and they were involved with the land annuities dispute. But as a result, we have one of the best collections of folklore anywhere in the world that is now a priceless treasure belonging to the nation that would have been lost forever if we hadn't done this. We've just come to the end of the decade of commemoration. And I'd say at this stage, the vast majority of the people have access to military archives up and down the country, in big communities and small. But again, it was in 1947, when the world was just coming together after the Second World War, when the decision was made to put the resources in, the human resources in. And they didn't have all our computers and all the facilities to get those archives together while the people were still alive. And it was a long-term project because the commitment was given that none of these would be open as long as any person who had been involved was alive. And as we all know, it was only in more recent times that these were made available to the public. So the state has, and in its early years, made some very brave decisions on long-term projects that would benefit the nation. And I believe that this treasure trove is a potential resource that other nations would look to and say, oh wow, that was clever, that was innovative. And that we would have probably wind up with maybe a museum building dedicated to the bank deposits. I was interested in one point you raised, Minister. I had two minds about the thing about the dormant accounts for this reason. I presume that's not bank balances that are in the deposit boxes, that it's more likely to be notes. And in that event, and you get a note minimum 80 years, but maybe 100 years or 150 years, I actually think the notes as museum pieces would be worth more than the money, and a lot more than the money. And certainly I have a few old notes that I have collected for years, and halfpennies and all sorts of things. I'm not cashing them in with the central bank, I guarantee you. So I actually think that the amount of money that would be got out of this would be very, very small, because I think in a lot of cases the intrinsic value of the historic artefact, even if it is currency of the time, would be worth more than the amount you get by putting it into the dormant accounts. And I would suggest that the state would be more than willing to forgo the monetary value and leave it where it should be, in some institution. What I would ask is this. I agree with careful consideration of things. A lot of time has already gone into this bill, and there's a lot of preliminary work done. They looked at all of the legislation, and European legislation, Irish legislation, and so on. So there was a very thorough job done on this. And I said I'd like to thank the two officials from OPLA who worked with me on it. But on the other hand, I think the system closing a thing down because it means work, because it means hassle, because it means you're making decisions, I think that would be a big tragedy. And I would ask here tonight that we proceed with reasonable speed, giving time for the various departments to have their input. But I think there should be a finite time put on it by government, it can't be by me, it can't be by the Oireachtas, to tell each government department to come back with the issues that they have concern with in the bill. And that we would then be able to have a detailed, line by line, forensic examination of this bill. Lots of people, because of shortage of resources in the Oireachtas here, have brought in small bills. They haven't had the resources that I've had, luckily, given to me by the Oireachtas to prepare this bill. A huge amount of professional drafting work has gone in here, and I think anybody who looks at the bill will see how detailed that work was. And it reminded me of doing a bill when I was a minister, and you had your own staff drafting up the heads, and then you had the parliamentary drafts people coming in and over and back and meeting after meeting. And this bill was put together in the same Lego way that any bill is put together, by people who knew what they were at. And therefore, Minister, I hope that a process would immediately be put in place to start those discussions with the other departments, to get clarification on the issues of concern in relation to the legislation, because resources and mechanics would only follow when the legislation would become law. I think if departments put it into the black hole, it would be a tragedy. Because, as I said, if somebody had said that you suddenly had found, a pit in it that not only had, we say, a gold hoard in it, and with some fantastic things in the National Museum, but had such a variation as is possible here, I think you'd say, look, if it's only money and law, put the effort in, and human resources, put the effort in and make it happen. And I believe this bill, if it is put through, will in time be seen as something really positive for Ireland.